This is not an advertisement for a new movie. This is a warning. If you are squeamish, if you have nightmares, if you have a weak heart, before you experience Reanimator, think very carefully. HP Lovecraft's classic tale of horror, Reanimator. It will scare you to pieces. This motion picture contains scenes of horror that may be considered too intense for anyone under the age of 18. Remember, you've been warned.
Every journey begins in the mind. A flight of imagination. A vision of what might lie across the universe. Or within the deepest regions of the subconscious. Dr. Edward Pretorius is about to embark on such a journey.
It's out of control. You've got to turn it off!
Something's coming.
Humans are such easy prey.
From the makers of Reanimator, from beyond.
Look at this.
All those years in the big city, we finally got out. We're living the dream.
Maybe it is a dream.
Then everything just blew up. Big flash, like a pink light. Or actually, I don't even know what color it was. It wasn't like any color I'd ever seen before.
Looks like a meteorite. You mean it's radioactive? I mean, it's from space, right? Meteorites are generally no more dangerous than ordinary rocks.
How can something that big just disappear? Did you plant those?
No.
Ward, you come here for a sec.
Oh, God.
What are you doing? Shh. It's talking to me. Who's talking to you?
A man in the well.
It's in the static, it's in the moisture. It's in here, it's out there. What's out there is in here now.
Everything's under control.
Why are you so in denial? That thing from the meteorite changes everything around it.
It's just a color. But it burns.
Do you believe me now?
I don't know what I believe anymore. Everything's gonna be A-okay.
And we're back for day 3 of Pop Pop Cod Cod. And sorry that you got that slightly long version of Color Out of Space, but I'm a huge advocate of this movie. And by the way, I would like to thank 2 of my panelists for wearing Color Out of Space colors. One in her hair and one on his shirt. It's amazing. And then, of course, we have special guest Cthulhu in the corner. Welcome to Fatagan. This is going to be a panel about HP Lovecraft, his problematic history, his racist ways, and quite frankly, how his creations have far outlived, outstripped, and just gone beyond their very dubious origins with their creator. I'm Sean. I am one half of Pop Cycle Baubles. We have created Pop Pop Con Con to celebrate all the cool stuff that we love and make a massive fan convention, and also to celebrate the opening of our store, which you can go find over at popcyclebaubles.com. But today, we're going to be getting into some Cthulhu stuff. So let me go ahead and introduce our panel, and then we're going to dive right in. So to my immediate screen left is my good buddy, Corrine. Corrine, if you don't mind, say hello to the audience and let them know just a little bit about yourself.
Hello, I'm Corrine. I am a recovering academic, possible cryptid and lover of a lot of monsters. So that's really where I stand on this.
Right. It's very true. She absolutely does love all sorts of monsters. She is always one of those folks I'll talk to about, oh, did you see this? She's like, oh yeah. She's usually there before I am. I'm like, fine. Every once in a while I'll get one on her, but 9 times out of 10 she's already right there in sync and simpatico. But directly to the south of Corrine is going to be somebody, if you've been watching Pop Con this weekend, you've seen him quite a bit, and that is the awesome author Michael Williams. Michael, say hello and let them know a little bit about yourself.
Hi, and I hope you're not tired of me.
Not at all, no.
I'm Michael G. Williams. I write award-winning science fiction, horror, and urban fantasy, including a science fiction detective novel which won the 2020 Manly Wade Wellman Award from the North Carolina Speculative Fiction Foundation. And Manly Wade Wellman is one of the many writers who have done more with the sorts of things that Lovecraft was writing and did better with them.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're going to get into that because, frankly, to talk about HP Lovecraft and all of his works, you have to talk about the authors who came after HP Lovecraft and worked inside of that weird Tales universe. But before we do that, let me introduce our last member and a special guest. To screen right, you know him as basically the high eldritch god of the old ones. He comes from deep down and he sleeps until stars will die. Of course, we're talking about Cthulhu. Everybody, welcome. We have Cthulhu here. Uh-oh. We lost Cthulhu. Wait, he's back. There he is. We got Cthulhu. And behind him, we have High Priest Gary Mitchel. So, Gary, if you don't mind, if you could ask Cthulhu to maybe let you have a little bit of screen time. Let's
for this.
You woke up for this. But Gary is a good friend of ours and also has let me be on multiple panels at Dragon Con. But Gary, please say hello and let them know a little bit about you, please. Oh. Cthulhu messing with us.
He is definitely messing with us. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Gary Mitchel. I am the co-director of the American Sci-Fi Classics track at DragonCon. I am a writer, reviewer, podcaster, general man about town, just a little bit north of Atlanta, and I have been a fan of Cthulhu since I discovered him in middle school, roughly, and those are my bona fides.
Very good.
To give a shout out to my friend Alicia, who did this wonderful painting and gave it to me as a gift.
Yeah, we have a cool painting. Since we're talking about cool stuff that we have here, let's talk about almost everybody here has something Cthulhu with them. But I wanted to show this. This is actually a painting that we got. Hold on, I'm going to take off my headset just for a second. But this is a painting that we got at C2E2 this year. And this for us is like peak Lovecraftian Cthulhu-ness. It's a house with tentacles coming out of it. And it reminds us of this really good book that is written fairly recently. I think it was called 13 or 14. I don't remember the exact title of it off the top of my head because I'm a horrible host. But it's about a house that essentially is home to the weird things. And we were reading this book, listening to the audiobook on the way to Chicago, and we had finished it as we were pulling into the convention center. And during the show, we noticed this painting. And I was like, oh my God, like we have to buy that because it's literally the house from the book. Even though it has nothing to do with the book, it just happens to be one of those synchronistic moments. So Laura was like, we got to show off all of our Cthulhu stuff. So as we're going to be talking today, you'll see some of the things that we'll kind of show you because quite frankly, Cthulhu has so outstripped this problematic author. I think that it is worth showing kind of the cool stuff that you can get involved with and enjoy without actually having to embrace the problematic nature of Lovecraft. And I think, quite frankly, that's where we need to start this conversation. Because for those of you who don't know, HP Lovecraft was an author who was at the very turn of the 20th century and in the early decades, started writing a lot of speculative fiction that he referred to as weird fiction. And he wrote in a very old English way. Even when he was writing it at the time, it was considered to be out of vogue because he was really obsessed with Poe. He was really obsessed with this kind of Gothic horror. And with the new kind of age of enlightenment that we were going into, with us discovering all sorts of things with science, he was feeling very small in a universe that was expanding very rapidly to human standards. And so he wrote a lot of his fears into his stories. Unfortunately, though, Lovecraft also tended to be for lack of a better term, a white supremacist. He was an Anglophile to the extreme. He believed that English culture was the absolute center and cradle of all civilization. And because of that, he absolutely did not think highly of anything that fell outside of ye old English. So his writings could very frequently fall into some pretty nasty stuff. But I'm going to go to Michael first, because I know Michael has been waiting to talk about this, and has Corrine. So of course, feel free to jump in as you guys like, but I would like to kind of hear your thoughts on the problematic history of HP before we start talking about the really good stuff that came out of it.
Sure. I think that we can enjoy the works of HP Lovecraft without forgiving him for his racism. In the same way that I can vote in this election without forgiving Thomas Jefferson for the way he treated Sally Hemings. Mm-hmm. The fact that the person who created a lot of these ideas was, in a lot of ways, a really terrible human being, doesn't mean that I have to abandon all of horror and science fiction. Right. But it does mean that I should seek out people who have done a better job with his ideas. Mm-hmm. And I think almost every writer that's revisited this world or visited these ideas or reused these ideas has done a better job. Mm-hmm. And it's been true for decades. I mean, Manly Wade Wellman was basically the progressive Lovecraft. His very first John Funston story is about people of color and their culture defending themselves against a white supremacist who is trying to exploit them economically. And the fact that that's a good thing. It's a really fascinating body of work across many different writers' works, and it's still happening now. You look at Laval's The Ballad of Black Tom, where he takes what's probably Lovecraft's most racist story, The Horror at Red Hook, and turns it inside out and makes it into a story of the empowerment of a marginalized community. Right. It's a really fascinating thing that has happened, and it's mostly because, as a writer, I think Lovecraft was a writer's writer. He had some really interesting ideas, but a lot of what he wrote boiled down to more of a pitch than a story. And other writers came along and took those ideas and actually developed them into stories and did interesting things with them in interesting ways that, showed a little more imagination than Lovecraft did. As my husband is fond of saying, Lovecraft was capable of imagining cats on the moon, but he was not capable of imagining women with agency or people of color who were good. Yeah. What a wild concept. I also think that every writer, and this is true in every genre, but it's especially true, I think, in speculative fiction, is ultimately working through something internally. Mm-hmm. And the thing that Lovecraft was working through was that, like you said, he felt very marginalized for different reasons. I also personally think that he was a huge closet case, and that's part of what he was trying to work out. But I think that he realized that he did not fit in the world around him. And he was looking for somebody to blame for that, in the way that modern day white supremacists look for someone to blame for the ways that they realize that the culture has left them behind. The culture had left people like Lovecraft behind, and he was angry, and he was looking for someone he could hold responsible for it who wasn't himself. Rather than take on the work of examining his inner beliefs and trying to adjust, he decided to just make it everybody else's fault and problem. And I think that's what he was, he was sort of hovering in midair between this love of science and the ways that things were changing there. And you look at the Mountains of Madness and you see that with his fascination with Antarctic exploration and science. But you also, he was, the other thing he was hovering in midair between was that obsession with the past and that certainty that if he had just lived in the past, things would be better and easier for him. And so that's what he's trying to work through, and he doesn't succeed at it.
Yeah, absolutely. Everybody got super quiet. I was waiting for Corrine to jump in because Corrine was super excited. I was like,
I climbed up on my big soapbox.
I absolutely agree with you that you see this kind of struggle for him in his works. It's a theme of a lot of his work, because most of his characters are also isolated and misanthropic, and they don't fit in, and they don't know how to do society, for lack of a better term. And that's also reflected in, yes, a lot of them are fascinated with science, but also I feel like there's some part of Lovecraft that was also afraid very much of it, because this man was afraid of everything. Everything was scary. Not white people are scary. Women are scary. Everything is scary. So of course there's some sort of science is scary in a way, because all of his work kind of boils down to, we are so small and insignificant and everything else is really big around us. And if you really stop to think about it, it's terrifying. And it's why I think it's why his work has resonated so far over the years, is for that aspect alone. I think that's really where people's imagination came and took this idea of the world is so much bigger than we can know and ran with it. And as you have said, quite frankly, made much better work out of it.
Absolutely. And
yeah,
I'm sorry, go ahead, Gary. Please.
Yeah, I mean, we have to kind of keep in mind the time frame of when this was. We're talking the 20s and 30s, when the progress of science was basically coming in and kicking out the underpinnings of what everybody knew as bedrock fact. The Earth is the center of the universe. We have, electricity works like this. And all of a sudden, science is actually coming in and going, actually, we're, like you said, we're small. We're a microscopic dot around another microscopic dot in a humongous cosmos that does not give a damn about us. And that is frankly terrifying. And if you look at the history of science at the time, it seemed like almost every month a new discovery that was coming out, putting us in that small place.
Our world became smaller and smaller and smaller. And that's a scary thing. I mean, when you really think about it, imagine the end of the 19th century going into the 20th century. Your world, you are gods of everything that you see. You have conquered, nature at this point. The Industrial Revolution has more than giving you a sense of purpose, and you are starting to truly create your monuments to modernity. And then this modern outlook, this modern science that has brought you this far starts to say, oh my God, we are so tiny and insignificant that would shake this air of superiority that you have just as a human, not just as somebody who is white, but I mean, humans started feeling so much smaller. And because Lovecraft was somebody who was a bit of an atheist, was very into science, he didn't even have a religious background to fall back on, because some people, they took more comfort and succor from saying, well, at least I still have my God, I still have my deity. He didn't have that. All he had were these science journals that he's reading, and he's like, this isn't cool. And I think it's interesting is that his writings really break down into two types. It breaks down into the horror of the existence of being so insignificant in the grand scheme of things, and then the other half is his escapism. Everything is, what, this sucks, let's go into the dream world. He spent so much time talking about the dream worlds and talking about the cats, right? And all that stuff, and how that's how we can escape. We can escape through our dreams. We can escape through, fantasy, basically, because if we stay here, it's just depressing. And
we have to give him credit for his love of cats. At least,
and we do have to give him credit for cats, yes. But I do think that when you look at it, this is a person who did not have a lot of other support mechanisms, because as Corrine and Michael both said, almost all of his protagonists are loners, they're outsiders, they're people who are misunderstood by and large by other people. So
you write what you know.
Yeah, you write what you know. You're a reflection of yourself in your writing. So he was talking about himself. And I feel bad for the guy on that front. But at the same time, oh, God, he was such a racist. I mean, it's such a misogynist.
And when faced with the idea that his kind of Anglo-centric view of the world may not be correct, instead of correcting that, he just kind of just dug deeper into his whole concept of, oh no, it's scary, it's really scary, instead of being like, well, maybe I should take a look at things outside of my Anglo-centric beliefs.
Right,
so that
just
I don't
yourself.
I just kind of don't feel bad for him for that. Sorry.
I mean, again, I feel
he did lighten up a little bit when he got married, but he still didn't lighten up as much as he should have or needed to. But yeah, and I hate to say this, but the reason his work resonates is that he did embrace that fear. Because all of his writings is based on a fear of the other, on the fear of the outside. And there's a reason that quote of his still resonates, that the oldest and strongest emotion of mankind is fear. And we really should look at him as a object lesson on that we should overcome that fear.
Right. And I think that's very fair. In fact, actually, Laura just said in the comments, I wonder if in 100 years people will be discussing J.K. Rowling the way we're discussing H.P. Lovecraft.
Oh.
I think so.
I think that's actually a very good comparison.
I think we're there now.
Yeah, we're there now.
We're not waiting for that.
Yeah,
we're not. And quite frankly, I think that it's fair to criticize authors. And what I think is really great is J.K. Rowling is a perfect example of how fan communities really loved what they read, and they're divorcing the creator from that material. They're just like, this isn't we're not supporting the creator anymore, which is why for me, I don't mind buying everything that I see that's HP Lovecraft, because quite frankly, there is no HP Lovecraft estate. The man died of pauper. He's dead. He's not getting any kickbacks from this. So the people who are much more moral, much more accepting humans, much more creative humans, and have really improved on his works, they're the ones who are getting the money. And I'd much rather those creators get that than unfortunately, or not unfortunately, but HP Lovecraft getting it. And since there's no estate, we don't have to worry about that. So when we buy a cool little Cthulhu, figure or something, or, hell, we even make, like, this is something Laura made, he's not getting any of this. We're doing it because we love the content, not the creator.
Well, and it's especially true when so many other people have, again, done it better. So I for instance, will give Mike Mignola my money all day, any day.
Mike Mignola's great,
any sort of Hellboy stuff, give it to me, because that is such entrenched in the idea of the cosmic horror kind of mythos, and it's better.
Yeah.
No, I think
so.
And
my
that's
rule
the
is
other.
very much. Oh, go ahead, Gary.
No, you please.
Oh, my rule is very much, once they're dead, it's okay to enjoy the works of terrible people, because then they can't benefit from it anymore. But until then, no. Like, I'll never buy an Orson Scott Card book until Orson Scott Card is dead.
Right.
And, I'll never buy a J.K. Rowling product until J.K. Rowling is dead. Lovecraft is kind of open season, but also we can find better people's work in the same body. Victor Laval needs money today because he's still alive, and so people should go buy the Ballad of Black Tom if they need to.
It's so good.
Oh, it's amazing. It's phenomenal. People should watch Lovecraft Country.
Absolutely.
Yes.
People should look to the ways that people have taken these ideas. They should go watch Alien. They should go things like that. They should go watch it. They Live. Well, They Live is kind of Lovecraftian, but
it's definitely existential.
I would recommend more In Mouth of Madness, but yes.
Yes.
That's so good.
Yeah.
Or even any Jeffrey Combs movie.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, the man has done.
Well, and look at Reanimator and From Beyond and The Color Out of Space and things like that. These are all movies that took kind of crap stories and made much better work out of them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and last night I just watched the HPL Historical Society's silent adaptation of Call of Cthulhu, which is made as if the movie was made in the year the story was published. It's
it really is good. Actually, I want to talk about them for a second. I'm sorry, Gary, I didn't mean to steal your thunder there. But I do want everybody to start pondering some of your favorite adaptations, because the HP Lovecraft Historical Society, I have been a huge fan of theirs for about 20 years. I keep sending them money so they can keep doing stuff. But their gimmick is they will only create movies in the era in which the stories were set. So as Gary was saying, the Call of Cthulhu was basically made during the silent era of film. So they refused to use any sound. And then a few years later, they decided to adapt the Whisperer in the Darkness, which was by the time the talkies had come around. So they were actually able to make a black and white talkie movie. But I'm sorry, Gary, please continue talking about Cthulhu, because it's awesome. I'm sorry. I just wanted to give them a shout out because I love them.
They definitely deserve a full shout out. But I think that's the other one thing we have to, I want to condemn him where he needs to be condemned. And by Lord, there's buckets of condemnation coming. But the few things he did do right is that he opened up his universe that anybody could play there. I mean, even when he was alive, he had a correspondence with a bunch of other writers, especially like Robert E. Howard. And people were like, hey, I've got an idea that plays off of what you're doing. And his attitude was, yeah, sure, go for it. That is pretty much where we start getting the ideas of a shared universe. Start there. That, that he didn't just it's really weird that the xenophobe was fine with other people playing with his toys.
No, absolutely. And I mean, you have to give a lot of credit to August Derleth, who was really the first person who took the mythos from Lovecraft.
He kept it alive.
He kept it alive, and he kept it going when people basically had forgotten about it. He was the one who started doing stuff like this. I'm actually going to hold this up because when I bought this, you could only get it in England, but this is the original, as I call it, the Bible edition of the Necronomicon, which is all of the weird tales. And of course, we got our boy Cthulhu on the cover of this. But at the time, you could only get this version in England. We were at DragonCon, actually, and that somebody had imported it. And we were able to get a copy of this. And in the years since then, they have brought it over. But Derleth was one of the people who started to compile all of these writings and to make sure that they kept getting out. And he kept
Arkham House Publishing,
Arkham House Publishing. And then he started to expand on it because he felt that Lovecraft had missed a lot of opportunities expanding not only the mythos, but how humans could fight back. Because by the time Derleth kind of came into his own as a creator with the mythos, as they call it, humanity had started to grapple with, okay, we're specs, but we could still matter. And I like that as you see it, that's what the mythos starts to turn towards, is that, yes, there are things that are so incomprehensible that we can't truly battle them one-on-one, but we could still screw those things over. We can put a tiny, kink in their plans. And sometimes that's all you can do, and it can be enough. And I like that Derleth actually adds in a little bit of optimism. Which is pretty cool.
Which is one of the biggest splits in early Lovecraft fandom. I remember in the 80s and 90s having arguments with other Lovecraft fans on whether or not Derleth ruined the mythos by bringing in good and evil, because part of the concept with Lovecraft is that good and evil are just human concepts and don't matter when it comes to the old ones. They're just there.
Right.
And we just happen to be in the way. And Derleth brings in, no, these ones are evil and these ones are good, and it's a fight and a battle, and that's all. That's practically a panel into itself.
It really kind of is. But I think that you can have both. I've always been of the panel, or not of the panel, but I've always been of the idea that both of those things can apply. There are some truly despotic, I just want to consume and destroy entities in the mythos. And then there are some who are like, you know what, we don't have to go rampaging across the cosmos. But by and large, in the middle, there's basically, like I like to call them, the forgotten children. Cthulhu would be one of them. They don't care if humanity dies. They don't care if humanity lives. It's just, you're in the way. And if you happen to survive, great, no problem. If you happen to die, who cares about stepping on ants? And that's kind of how I view the mythos. So I think that you can have both philosophies inside of it, because quite frankly, you can look at humanity as a reflection of that. There are people who are intrinsically good. There are people who are intrinsically bad. And by and large, in the middle, there are people who are a little bit of both. And we can swing either way. And I think that you can look at the mythos in that same perspective. Now, Michael, as the writer, I'm curious, what is your thought on Derleth? Do I have any standing here at all, or am I just completely out alone on a very, very rickety pier?
I don't like his take on things as much as I enjoy sort of the abstract ideas of Lovecraft's take on things.
Okay.
But he gets credit for having, made sure that this stayed in popular culture to some degree. He's somebody who kept it. I mean, I don't think it was necessarily like deeply buried, and I don't think it was necessarily too near the surface, but he kept it within reach of the sort of people who reinvented it again in the 70s and 80s and gave us things like the Call of Cthulhu tabletop RPG.
Yes.
And they gave us things like the book Who Goes There, which led to the movies, which led to The Thing, and they gave us Alien. I think that what he did was keep alive that concept of the intersection of science fiction and horror. And so I don't particularly favor his versions of those things, but I'm glad that he kept alive that genre crossover idea.
Yeah, somebody kept the flag waving during those decades until other creators really found it.
Yeah, I mean, but to some degree, by the time that the 70s and 80s roll around, the coffee's pretty stale.
Yeah.
But, somebody else by then has figured out that, we could just brew better coffee rather than continuing to drink that same old cold stuff.
That's fair. That's fair. How about you, Corrine? What did you think? And also, from the Peanut Gallery, Laura would like you to know that she likes your necklace. It's dope AF. So.
It's Mothra.
Oh, it's Mothra. Nice.
Awesome. That's
actually, hold on. I don't know if anybody can see this. Let me stand up for a second. You can actually see I'm wearing a Cthulhu versus Godzilla t-shirt. So, yes, I'm right there with you.
I'm repping my best girl today.
There you go. So what about you, Corrine? What do you think about this? Do you think that Derleth really brought anything, or you think he was just really the standard bearer that we needed to get it to a modern creator so they could start to re-envision the content?
So I do think that you really need, in order for something to survive long enough, and I feel this way about many, many fandoms, things have to change. And you have to incorporate change into the original kind of context and stories, or else they die. And you see this is just storytelling in general. It's either you adapt something and you change it, and you take the parts that work, and then you abandon the parts that don't work. And that's how things become part of our pop culture. Because if no one ever changed or modified his works, he probably would just, I don't think they'd have the same resonance that they do now.
Fair.
Again,
I think that's really fair. I think that, just like what Michael was saying and what you're saying, is that if you don't continue to look back with a critical eye on these things and take the stuff that works and leave the stuff that doesn't, then we don't come up with new creative things. I mean, nothing exists alone creatively. We're always riffing off of something else, whether it be a myth that we've heard, or, maybe a spooky story that our grandparents told us, or whatever. We're inspired by things that have come before. So I think that's intrinsic to, there was just something about that horror that Lovecraft wrote about, that once you're able to separate out all of the garbage, the racist, the misogynistic, the just bad human parts of it, and really focus on the monsters and the horror of what he was experiencing, there's something there that resonates decade after decade. And quite frankly, it's a wonderful vessel, because now we're in a point where we actually have creators who are looking not only at the source material, but also the creator, and turning it on its ear. At the top of the hour, Michael had mentioned Lovecraft Country. And if you're not watching Lovecraft Country, or if you've not read that book, you're missing out, because it is a wonderful subversion of what HP Lovecraft had originally written, but at the same time being completely faithful to the source material, which is a very hard thing to do.
Yeah. But if you are not watching Lovecraft Country, you're doing yourself a disservice. I mean, and it says something that we're 9 episodes in, and with all the monsters and all the magic, the scariest thing in it are still white people.
Yeah.
Where's the lie? Where's the lie?
Also, Pop Cycle, that was the book the one you're talking about there with the apartment. That's Dreams in the Witch House.
Yeah.
Well, actually, she's referring to, I know exactly which one. Laura was actually asking, what was the...
From Beyond?
Nope. The book called, with the one apartment that went to the far realm. She's actually talking about the book named 14. That's from this one, written by Peter Klein, I believe. Let me see here. Yes, by Peter Klein. He actually started a series of books. He did one called 14. He did one called The Fold, and then he did one called Terminus. And it's basically, it's a really interesting story where, and I don't want to go off on a tangent, but he envisioned a world where, as science was being developed, people realized that we were butting up against cosmic horror. Like literally, like our science was starting to discover that cosmic horror was right beyond the veil that we could see. And if we weren't careful, we were going to puncture a hole in it. And somebody did by accident, and they realized that the thing that we consider Cthulhu, the thing that we consider Cthulhu, these are what they call apex predators, and they just fly around from reality to reality, parallel realities, and they eat everything. When they're done, the planet is just a dust bowl. There's nothing left alive on it, and they basically have finished off the dimension next to ours, and they're trying to enter our world. So this guy creates an apartment, a house, and the science to keep them locked away. And one of the people who helped him with this was HP Lovecraft's father, and HP Lovecraft as a small boy. And so as a small boy, he hears about these monsters and starts writing about this in that world. So there are like all these like cults that have sprung up about Lovecraft, thinking that, no, we actually want the monsters to come through. And so that's the series of stories, is basically, what is this and what do these creatures want? It's a really good series. There is a fourth one that's technically part of it, but it happens on the moon, and it basically doesn't have anything to do with it. But it's not about the Cthulhu monsters, the apex predators. But that idea, again, was taking the basic, undercarriage of that weird horror and then completely reimagining it. And I love that about creators today. I mean, the modern creative community and writers, they've been so good. Like, what are some of your favorite modern adaptations? Since we gave a shout out to Peter Klein, I'd love to hear some of your favorites. Does anybody have one off the top of their head that they want to mention?
Corrine should go first.
Corrine.
Oh, there are so many. Of course, I love Hellboy, which draws very heavily from that context. I also
Definitely.
There's a book that just came out recently called Meddling Kids. Have you heard of it?
I have. Yes, I have read that.
It's super cute. It riffs on Scooby-Doo, but also riffs on the deep ones and this kind of cosmic horror on the side. It's very cute. I will say I loved it. And it's a lot of fun. But I think my favorite like modern adaptation is really just I'm a big fan of the Arkham horror games. I really love playing those tabletop games, and I think that's part of it is the kind of fun aspect of getting to explore all these things and having snippets of the lore and what they've added to it and brought it together. So there's so much modern stuff out there that you wouldn't even think is even vaguely attached to it, but until you start getting into it and be like, oh yeah, that is heavily draws on it. Because there's a Stephen King short story that I really like that I remember called Crouch's End.
Yeah.
And that one, they did a television adaptation of it, which is how I discovered it. But it's about two young people that kind of end up in Innsmouth in this like trapped in Innsmouth, and it's really just a lot of fun.
Well, I mean, Corrine, you mentioned Stephen King, and Stephen King, for me, is one of the great modern reimaginings of HP Lovecraft. I mean, it all but Pennywise is all but an old god, right? I mean, we know he's an elder god. His short story that was adapted for Netflix, 1922, I don't know if you've seen that, is essentially The Rats in the Walls. I mean, it is almost a one-to-one Rats in the Walls. It is very close to it. Which I think is, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. No, even in The Stand, one of Randall Flagg's names is, I can never pronounce any of the creatures. It's
Nyarlathotep.
Thank you. Because, again, I will tell you right now, I don't speak very well. So I grew up reading a lot. So I didn't have any way nobody to talk to these things about. So and then that's like one of his actual names. So King was obviously was heavily influenced by Lovecraft too, and it shows in his work.
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, for those of you who want to know what we were just talking about, we were talking about Nyarlathotep. Okay, that's how you're supposed to say it. Okay, so that if you want to know how to say it, there is your enunciation guide brought to you by the letter N, right? Like so, we're Sesame Street for Lovecraft enunciation. Because funnily enough, though, we're talking about stuff like Fhtagn and Nyarlathotep and Cthulhu. Cthulhu's not technically the way you're supposed to say it. It's just the way we've all decided to say it. I think they said the way you're supposed to say it is Cthulhu, I think is the official way of saying it.
Okay, so let me break this story out.
Okay, go for it, Gary. Yeah.
One of the shout outs I wanted to give was to Pagan Publishing, now Arc Dream, who do role-playing games, Delta Green being their most famous work. I'm actually friends with those guys. They're wonderful people. They really do good work. And I was on the discussion mailing list with them back in the 90s. And anybody who knows me knows my email address. And 90 times out of 10, if you're going to find me online, you're going to find me as Sneezy the Squid.
Right.
The reason this comes from is we were having this discussion on the email mailing list of, do you pronounce it Cthulhu, Cthulhu, Cthulhu? And I piped up with, we don't have the proper mouth parts to say the names.
Right.
The closest that we can do is duct tape some squids to your face and say it while sneezing.
I think that's fair.
And one of the guys went, I hereby dub thee Sneezy the Squid.
I think that's actually probably one of the best ways of explaining it. Because, I mean, Lovecraft always said humans don't have the proper, we just don't have the ability to say the name properly.
We don't have the tools.
We just don't have the proper tools to use these words. We can write it down, but we can't enunciate it the proper way. And again, that's another thing that I think makes his creativity something that we can actually look at and go, wow, putting the, problematic stuff to the side, there's some really interesting ideas here, because some of the stuff he's writing about, you're not supposed to be able to understand or say it because it's not yours. It's this monster from another dimensions thing. And that's so interesting that you're writing stories for humans to enjoy, but at the core of it, it's technically not for humans, right? It's like we're ancillary to the mythos that is being created.
Now I want someone to write some stories called Not for Humans.
Right. And Laura's like, damn, my lack of tentacles. So I think that's very fair. But going back to what you're saying, Corrine, though, absolutely, Stephen King, I think, is a huge one. The Mist is another example of we punch a hole in reality and all these monsters come out, and the monsters are just existing, and we just happen to be caught up in their wake. There are so many Cthulhu and Lovecraftian and mythos references in his writing that you have to. And Gary, teeing up on your role-playing game material, I love the fact that just recently, like in the last year or so, Evil Hat, who was doing, I think it was called The Fall of Cthulhu, I think is the name of their series that they were doing.
Trail of Cthulhu, Fall of Cthulhu. They've got a few different. Evil Hat has some really good stuff.
They have some really good stuff. They flat out said, because the creator of that is a black man, and he wanted, because people were saying, how can you write about HP Lovecraft and not be a hypocrite? And he had this exact conversation. He writes it as a foreword to the books, basically saying we can criticize him, we could see him as a racist, and then, like in bold text, he is absolutely a racist, and we could still divorce that part of the material and keep the cool mythos stuff that other authors have built on for so many years. And I think that's ultimately what this panel is about, is let's not praise the man, let's just praise the really cool concepts that have lived beyond him, and how they've moved so far away. Reanimator is a perfect example of that. We were talking about Jeffrey Combs at the top of the hour. Half of the damn pre-roll that we had is Jeffrey Combs commercials, because dear Lord, that man has been in so many adaptations of his works. But Reanimator is the big one. And if you've ever read the original Reanimator, when they talk about the fact that, oh God, I forgot his name, Herbert West, as West is collecting the bodies, Lovecraft almost delights in describing the African-American body as being something less than human, which is, you have to skip over those paragraphs. Like they're unreadable by today's standard. Like I can't even, like I almost and I might still do it one day, just like take like a black Sharpie through those pages. If I knew that the paper was thick enough and it wouldn't show through the other side, just redact that part of the story, because it really is just terrible. And they didn't even try to entertain that when they made the movie in the 80s. And I'm so glad that they didn't try to entertain any portion of that repugnant outlook.
A low-budget 80s horror movie does a much better job of imagining a really complex story and a really complex set of motivations and really complex characters, and depicting a really fascinating horror and science fiction set of plot than Lovecraft ever could have.
Yeah, and that's one of the things in get back to Stephen King. One of my favorite works of his is Dance Macabre, which is his, this is my horror lecture I used to give when I was an English teacher as a book. And he talks about one of the things that Lovecraft did with the science that, up until Lovecraft kind of got hold of it, horror was still stuck in castles, in old Europe, in creatures wandering, in vampires and werewolves and all that kind of moribund old stuff, which is still fun. But Lovecraft kind of dragged it kicking and screaming into the 18th century with science, and showing us that we can find fear in discovery, which is which again, the concept is greater than the man.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of that, and I think that is the danger the danger he's trying to present in that story is our curiosity can sometimes be our undoing, right? And that has definitely become a central focus of a lot of horror today, right? Especially science fictional horror. Hell, Event Horizon is a really good example of essentially a Lovecraftian story in space, no less. I mean, we're going to try to find a way to move faster than light, and we accidentally
don't go there.
we punch into a chaos dimension, and it's like, what? And I think that those kind of stories are absolutely quintessential to the HP writing experience as far as what he was going at. So who else has some examples? Or do we have any other examples possibly, Michael?
So some of my favorites are things like, some of them are the comedy adaptations. The HP Lovecraft Historical Society's 2 CDs, A Very Scary Solstice, and the second one, which I think is called A Scarier Solstice or something like that.
Yeah.
Those are phenomenal CDs of choral renditions of mythos Christmas carols, and they're so funny, and they're really solid. They're great listening, and they actually do really well at a holiday party as background music.
It's beginning to look a lot like Fishmen.
Exactly. They're so much fun. And I think that it's always great when people see the potential absurdity in the Lovecraftian mythos and like really exploit that and have fun with it. I think my favorite written spin on it is Laval's The Ballad of Black Tom, because it so perfectly addresses everything that's wrong in the horror at Red Hook, and it addresses our current experience as well in some like really direct ways by the end. It's beautifully written. It's gorgeous words on the page. Like, it's just beautiful language, but it's also really terrifying horror and great, phenomenal. And then I think probably my favorite like new film adaptation of it is probably The Color Out of Space, because that's like so exceptionally lush and beautiful and horrifying and just like crushing by the end. And that said, my favorite like HP Lovecraft film adaptation period is arguably not even an HP Lovecraft film adaptation. It's like 5 steps removed, but it's The Thing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. John Carpenter alone in the 80s was like the herald of HP Lovecraft without actually doing HP Lovecraft. I mean, if you look at his, what do you call it? The Apocalypse trilogy that he did? Or it was the Doom trilogy?
Apocalypse trilogy.
It was the Apocalypse trilogy. You start with The Thing, right? And The Thing is just absolutely mwah, right? You have the Prince of Darkness.
The Thing is a perfect film. Let's just call it what it is. It's a perfect film.
Honestly, like when you're talking about perfect films from the 80s, you talk about Back to the Future, but The Thing is also like, if Back to the Future,
favorite movie.
If Back to the Future is like the perfect sci-fi film, then The Thing is the perfect horror film. I mean, it's everything about that movie is just right on target. But then he follows that up with a much smaller budget, but one that actually scared me more because some of the visuals in it just got to me was Prince of Darkness. And how, when that woman's face starts to basically become melted goo, and then she starts walking around and you just see it all kind of dangling. Oh my God. Like, I don't know why, but like, I still, to this day, I'm like triggered, like just, I still have a hard time with that movie. And then of course They Live isn't part of that trilogy, but it is actually kind of in there. But he wraps out his Apocalypse trilogy with, of course, In the Mouth of Madness, which is quite frankly like not only a commentary on why Cthulhu and the mythos can be scary, but also, what if it was real and how would that affect people? And because, people always mutate in the Lovecraftian stories. What if the writer is mutating because these things are going through his mind? And oh, it's so great.
Do you read Sutter Kane?
No, hell no.
I think John Carpenter really understands cosmic horror, and we talk a lot about our favorite adaptations of these things, but we can call it like the Lovecraft mythos. I kind of have shied away from using that term and have kind of pushed into the greater cosmic horror sense, because I think cosmic horror is it translates much better in writing as opposed to like a visual media, because it's so hard to talk about your giant unexplainable thing when you can see the giant unexplainable thing. So like, that's why Carpenter is so great at that, because he shows you these things and then he's like, this is really scary, and you're like, you're right, that is actually very scary. And I think that is the big difference between an adaptation that works and doesn't, because like I love Carpenter's work. And I also, have you seen The Void?
Yes. The Void is great.
It's a fantastic way of doing cosmic horror, because you're just like, I don't understand what's going on, but it is very scary. And that's how it should make you feel. And that movie follows through more on like what you're feeling through watching the film and all these visuals. And the plot is there, don't get me wrong, but I think it does a really good blend of showing and telling and doing all that.
So, for those who don't know, The Void was a movie. It was 2017, I think, right?
It's on Netflix, yeah.
Yeah, it's on Netflix.
It's on Netflix. But The Void actually has this really great premise, which is this: you're in this small, sleepy town, and a sheriff is trying to figure out what the hell is going on in this one night.
You're trapped in a hospital to make it worse.
Yeah.
Like everybody's trapped in a hospital, and there are reasons that you're trapped in the hospital.
And you're trying to figure out what's going on. And it's one of those movies that I hate at first because a lot of times people come up with a cool what if idea and they never pay it off. Like, because a lot of these films, if the last 10 minutes actually give you that oomph, then it's considered a successful film, in my opinion. And a lot of times for these indie films, they stop right as the thing that you wanted to see starts. And then they're like, well, you know what happens next. And I hate that. The Void did what it needed to do. It brings you all the way up to it, and then it says, yeah, we could stop the movie right here, but boogly, 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 boogly. And when they do it, oh my Lord, there is this perfect image. And what's funny is that they put it on every poster, and it makes no sense until you see the movie, which is this triangle, and it's like you're looking into the void. And when you see what that entails, it is creepy AF.
I think it's a fantastic play on cosmic horror. Also, nobody's brought this up yet, and this is a movie that actually came out earlier this year, but did you see Underwater?
Yes.
Okay, I haven't yet because I have problems with Kristen Stewart.
I mean, I'm sorry. You can be wrong. That's fine. You're allowed.
We've had this conversation before. We have.
I know. We have had the conversation before. I still think you're wrong, and that's fine.
Well, no, but you see, now here's the thing: is that I've heard from a lot of people that even if you don't like Kristen Stewart, you need to give this movie a chance. And I'm like, I've been so busy; it's been on the list. I just haven't gotten to it yet.
And I will say, if you are interested in claustrophobic, creepy underwater cosmic horror, you should probably watch Underwater.
No, absolutely. Christina, who has been on here a couple times, she literally texted me. She's like, "Oh my God, Sean, you have to watch Underwater." And I was like, "Why?" She said, "Cthulhu just showed up." And I'm like, "What?" Like
well,
that was
like
the whole
spoiler.
Well, no, but that's all she said. She was like, "Cthulhu shows up," because anytime we see a big sea monster or something, because I knew it had to be something like that, some kind of underwater monster. So when she says Cthulhu, it's just like a big umbrella statement for us. So I'm like, okay, I'll get to it. If you're telling me Cthulhu shows up, I'll get to it. Whether or not it's actually the Cthulhu, who knows? Hopefully, Corrine just didn't spoil me. But if it is Cthulhu, hold on. First off, look at this little guy. How can he want to eat your face?
That is something. I mean, we're kind of running out of time, but that's one of the things I want to talk about. Is I remember being a fan in the 80s when most people, when you said Cthulhu, they went Gesundheit and had no idea who Lovecraft was. To see him become a pop culture icon is, as a horror fan, is kind of cool. But we also went from this to this.
Look at this. Yes,
and
exactly.
I just wonder if that's our human self-defense mechanism of that is a concept that scares the ever-living crap out of me and makes me want my brain want to crawl in the back of my skull and hide. Let's make it cute.
Right. Now,
I think that's probably this is my fault or people like me. That's probably, I'll take the blame for that, because I love to be terrified, but I also love the idea of taking these horrific, terrible monsters and making them kind of cute. But to me, that doesn't take away from their power.
Oh, it doesn't. No,
because,
I'm not saying this is a negative. It's just it's a weird that. Wait, what?
We're a species that turned wolves into Pomeranians. Yes, that's what we're doing.
You can't see my plushy Mothman collection, but it's up there.
Yeah, she does.
So.
She has a bunch of Mothman. But I actually want to say, Gary, you bring up a good point. There's actually a really good comic series that Boom released about a decade ago called The Fall of Cthulhu. And what it's about is people who are falling into the weird stories. They're falling into the cosmic horror, and they're discovering all of these things that are going on. And one of the subplots is the Cthulhu cults have basically found a way to make Cthulhu acceptable, palatable, and popular. And so every time somebody buys a super cute thing, it's basically considered a point of worship. And they're trying to wake Cthulhu up. So the whole point of the story is there is a cult who's trying to wake Cthulhu up because they're ready to basically, embrace the end as was promised to them. And then there's another cult who they like the idea of Cthulhu, but they like all the power they get by kind of like siphoning off the energy, but they don't want him to wake up because they don't want the gravy train to end. And it's about these two cults who are basically constantly fighting to basically wake him up, put him to sleep, wake him up, put him to sleep. And half of the battle is they keep making cute toys and stuff. And it's starting to wake Cthulhu up. They're like, no, put him back to bed. If that doesn't sound like a crazy concept, go read it. It's pretty good.
It was a phenomenal comic book.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. But it really is a weird kind of worship that you could almost put towards this completely fictional, elder god. But I wanted to rewind just for a second because, Michael mentioned earlier the color out of space. And the color out of space, if you haven't had a chance to see this, the reason why I'm giving a special focus to this one is that is by far my favorite short story out of all of the Weird Tales. If you're unfamiliar,
a lot of people say it's his best.
It really is. And one of the reasons why is, one, there's really no racism in it. It's just about a little family on a farm. So you don't have any really external characters it's about 4 people. So they never even bring in that guy down the street. It's just about like a small family. So fortunately, because he's writing about a small group of people, he never accidentally dips his toe into his racist water. So it's very readable even by today's standards. But the thing I love about that was at the time that he was writing his stories, they had just discovered things like ultraviolet light and X-rays. And they were talking about invisible light that was still here and could affect humans. And so he was like, what if light was alive? What if there was living light? And so the whole story is about basically a meteorite that lands on this farm, and this small family is then infected with this light. And they try to describe it. They're like, it was purple, but it was kind of pink, but it wasn't. And they go, and the color, it burned. And they describe all this stuff and how these people are completely overwhelmed by this entity. And it is such it's a horrific tale because essentially once the meteorite lands, everybody's screwed. Like there's no oopsie and we can find a way to put it back in the box. We're just done. And it's such a great microcosm, and it's only like 20 pages long. So if you've never read it and you want to read it and you don't have to worry about problematic writing as far as some of his themes, this is a pretty safe thing to read. And then the adaptation. Not only did they nail the mood, not only did they nail what the color looked like, it stars Nicolas Cage. And let me pitch this as an idea, okay? If somebody said we're going to make a movie about an obscure HP Lovecraft story starring Nicolas Cage, and the director is going to be the guy who filmed the super bomb movie Island of Dr. Moreau and has not done anything since then, you would think that is a dumpster fire on a train going towards a nuclear facility. I mean, it sounds like it's a bad call all the way around, but in the most beautiful way, it works on every single level. It's kind of perfect.
It's a beautiful film.
Yeah.
Visually, it's gorgeous artwork. It's also really effective horror, and it includes some really compelling characters and deliciously understated performances for a lot of it, which is part of what makes it so effective as horror. They don't just open up with screaming co-eds. Instead, it's a slow burn, and it lets you really live in these people's lives, so that you have an understanding of what's at stake and how tragic it is that this is going to be undone by the horrific elements. And in that way, it is vastly superior. I know that y'all really like the story, and that's cool. And I'm not trying to say that that's bad, but it's not my favorite of his stories because to me, it reads like it's a pitch for the idea of the movie.
And I think that's very fair. And quite frankly, I think Michael landed right on it, which is that they do such a good job of building this family. You feel bad when the bad stuff starts happening to this family. Yeah. You really feel bad for this family. And what I will give Richard Stanley credit for is he found the perfect way of actually making Nicolas Cage act and then letting him go full Nicolas Cage. So there's an insanity element which is very frequent in HP Lovecraft movies. So they basically it's almost like he made a deal. Okay, Nick, you got to give me 80% understated, controlled. And the last 20%, when we get to it, just turn it on, buddy. Go full cage. So you're able to get the ridiculousness that we all want to see because that's what we all tune in for Nicolas Cage. But then the other 80% of his performance is pitch perfect, right what it needs to be. And it's a magic trick. You get the best of both versions of Nicolas Cage because we got to remember, this man's won an Academy Award. Like, the man knows how to act. He just forgot.
And part of why the movie is so good and part of why the idea, part of why it's able to be so good, is that pitch that got written was for a really cool and inventive idea. You know, it may not be hugely developed as a novel or anything because it's a very short story, but it's a really neat and new idea. You know, so all the times that I'm like dunking on Lovecraft for his racism, I'm not trying to dunk on him for having had some really creative ideas.
Yes,
you know. People have come up with some really amazing spins on those ideas.
Yeah, and you know, as much as he deserves, like I said, the buckets of condemnation, he wouldn't have survived if there wasn't some talent in there.
Totally,
definitely.
There were a whole bunch of racist people writing then whose names we don't know and we never should know.
Right.
Absolutely. And there is one other movie that I want to mention because we're almost out of time. So I want to end on one because nobody's mentioned it yet. And Laura actually brought it up in the chat, which is a movie that was released by Shudder. It's an exclusive called The Beach House, and it's pretty damn good. And basically, one of the main themes of a lot of Lovecraft stuff is that the people who understand what's coming in these weird tales, these cosmic horrors that have rolled into it, they start to mutate and change. And in many of the cases, because all of the civilizations that belong to Cthulhu and the elder gods are underwater, they tend to turn into like fish people and stuff, and they want to return to the ocean. So this is about a couple of people, or like 4 people, who are in a beach house, and this fog rolls in. And this fog starts to affect people in weird ways, and they start to notice like all these jellyfish wind up on the beach, and all this kind of weird stuff starts to happen to them. And it's really great cosmic horror. It's a slow burn, and it actually finds a way to pay off in the end that was really unique. And it does pay back into that concept of, you know, people who get it are almost rewarded for rolling into it versus trying to fight against it, which is a theme that we didn't really even get a chance to talk about, which is, you know, in a lot of Lovecraft's tales, there is a contingent of people who actually embrace that horror and thrive, albeit not necessarily as humans anymore, but they do thrive. And I think that's an interesting take as well. But we are right at time, and I want to thank everybody here. This was great. This was one I was like, yeah, we're going to talk about Cthulhu. We're going to talk about Lovecraft. And honestly, we could have done 2 panels. We could have done one that was all about problematic HP, and then we could have talked about all of the cool stuff that was derived from problematic HP, because really we've just scratched the surface. There are so many role-playing games, books, novelizations, short stories, musical albums. I mean, hell, Metallica has a song called The Call of Cthulhu. I mean, it's everywhere. And what's really great about it is if you are a fan of this, or if you're just getting interested in it because of this panel, I am jealous of the journey that you're about to go on, because there is so much cool stuff out there. But before we go, I do want to thank all of our panelists here. I want to thank Gary. I want to thank Michael. I want to thank Corrine. You guys were absolutely fantastic. And you made this panel just fire on all cylinders. And I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to be here with us.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
I got them with praise.
Yes.
And I also want to thank everybody in the audience who came around and had wonderful comments. I'm sorry I wasn't able to get everybody's comments on the screen, but I try not to distract us too much. But if I missed it, I promise you I saw them. And thank you so much for being here. And of course, if you haven't had a chance to go do so yet, do remember that Pop Pop Con Con is brought to you by Laura and myself. We are Pop Cycle Baubles. Go check out our Etsy store. Help us start to develop what we're going to do for 2021 by maybe dropping a couple ducats on some stuff. But regardless, I do hope that everybody here has enjoyed their time with us, and also is going to come back for our 1:30 show, where we're going to be doing an entire panel about anime, basically from the 20th century. So
for old people.
So we're going to basically be talking about anime for old people. We're going to be talking about that, and we're going to have Corrine's going to be on that. Our friend Dodger, Mike Trex. We're going to have a lot of great folks. So I do hope you'll come back for that. And if not, please come back for our 3:00 show, which is going to be B Movie Excellence. And I guarantee you, some of the movies we mentioned here will probably get mentioned in that one. But folks, it's time. We're done. I'm going to go take a break. Again, thank you to my panelists. Thank you to everybody out there. We will see you in approximately half an hour. And so until then, get spooky, read some really awesome derived work. And if you can,
Litany of Earth.
Maybe have some Cthulhu coffee. Oh, wait, hold on. Wait, there we go. Cthulhu coffee. Maybe some Cthulhu coffee. And Gary, you get the last one. What was that? Maybe go read
Litany of Earth. Litany of the Earth.
There you go. Litany of Earth. We're going to get out of here. Thank you so much. We'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.